miter saw?
It is made for cutting across the grain. So only cutting this way, across the grain in the wood, never cutting this way. Never, ever, ever. It's called a miter saw because you can adjust the angle. There is a little lever underneath here. If you pull on that lever, you can adjust the angle that you want to cut at. Typically, we'll leave it at 0 degrees and it kind of clicks in there. You can also adjust the angle of the tilt of the saw to tilt it this way as well. Typically, that will not be needed. Also, our saw is a sliding miter saw. Some saws that people have used in the past are a chop saw, which means that the blade just goes straight down like so as you cut. Ours also slides out, so we can do a longer cut. So it slides out, then goes down, then goes back. That's the motion we want to do when we're making these cuts. Down and all the way back. The blood bubble on this machine is very clearly marked. There's a little picture of a hand here and over here. And we've even marked it so that we know this is all the blood bubble here. We need to keep our hands out of this zone while we're using the tool, which also extends this way. People will often line up to the laser and think they're good to go. This saw blade is going to be spinning like a wheel, and if your piece of wood is not supported, that wheel is gonna throw your piece of wood. So as this comes down and it touches that wood, it's gonna go mess up the saw, mess up your project, hopefully not mess up you, but very likely could. So always have your piece of wood all the way pushed back. No gaps here. If it's tilting like this, bad. Tilting like that, bad. Always pushed up. Also, no gaps underneath here. Right? There should be nice and flat on the table and no gaps back here. When you get ready to cut, one hand is going to be holding it outside the blood bubble, so it's up against the fence, the back part here, and flat on the table. So you're pushing downwards and backwards at the same time. Your hand could also be on the other side. If you like to switch hands, you could also be over here doing the same thing, as long as your hand is outside the blood bubble. So we are getting ready to make some cuts on the miter saw here, and we have drawn several lines here. We have measured these to be 3 inches apart, and we have drawn a nice straight line with our square here. And I see this all the time, that people will draw all their shapes they want to cut out of here, and then they'll go cut them out. So let's see what happens here when we start cutting. I'm not going to cut all the way through to show you. So I'm lining it up. I am putting my hand on the outside here, outside the blood bubble. Other hand's coming up here, pulling it out. I'm going to pull the trigger before touching the wood. Go all the way down. Typically you would go all the way back, but I wanted to show you that as you do this, you lose wood to sawdust, right? We got sawdust coming off that machine. If this is where I want to cut, I'm losing a little bit of wood here. So if all these were going to be 3 inches, these end up being smaller as I go because I lose a little bit of wood here because the saw blade comes through here. So there's 2 ways to fix this. You make your cut and then you measure your next piece each time, or measure these and give yourself a little space on each one, knowing that the saw blade is going to remove some of that wood. So when we go to make our first cuts, we want to have the piece of wood all the way back. No gaps, no gaps. Line it up where you want. and hold it down with one hand, making sure it's not going to go anywhere. Pull the saw out, pull the trigger before touching the wood, then go all the way down and push it all the way down and then push it all the way back. This is another mistake I see people do, is they do not push the saw blade all the way back. So after cutting, it's still attached there. Because that saw blade is round, it still is not cutting all the way through here. So make sure you push the saw all the way down and then all the way back as far as it possibly will go to cut all the way through here. If your piece of wood is getting too small and you're still trying to make a straight cut, we cannot cut it on this machine because you will not be able to hold this safely. The best we can do is about there, because this little clamp can come down and clamp it on there. If the clamp's not holding it secure, this is how the clamp should look. We need to use a different tool for this job. Also, you always want to grab your piece of wood and try and move it. If it can move, it's not going to be safe either. And we will also have, when we're using the clamp, have an extra device to hold this down. The stick is holding down your piece of wood while the hand is in a safe place outside of the blood bubble.